All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're cracking open a genuine metaphysical mystery. In this explainer, we're investigating the absolute most basic logical rules of our reality. We're going to examine a concept that you use every single day, probably without even realizing it, and we'll look at a famous historical attempt to destroy that very concept. So get ready because we are going to do some serious philosophical detective work.
Picture this. You walk into your kitchen, grab a coffee, and boom, there's a bright yellow beach ball sitting right there on your table. You've literally never seen this thing before in your life. What exactly goes through your mind? Well, you'd probably assume someone left it there as a prank, right? Or, I don't know, if you're feeling super creative, maybe you'd wonder if it got teleported from across the universe. But here is the one thing you would absolutely never do. Assuming you're a rational person, you'd never just shrug and say, it's just there for no reason at all, needs no explanation, right? Because no rational person accepts for absolutely no reason as an actual resting place for their curiosity.
Okay, let's dive into this. That small, almost embarrassingly obvious intuition you just had about the beach ball, that things which exist must have some account of why they exist, well, that's actually one of the oldest rules in philosophy. It's called the principle of sufficient reason, or just the PSR for short. Now, in its classical form, the PSR states that every being has the sufficient reason for its existence either in itself or in another. But to put it simply, it just means everything is intelligible. Everything, literally everything, has a reason. Now, you might be thinking this is just some abstract philosophical jargon, but it's really not. This principle is a strict pragmatic necessity. I mean, think about how we operate in the real world. A doctor doesn't just look at a patient's symptoms, throw their hands up and say, well, this illness has absolutely no cause, and just move on. No way! They look for a pathogen. Same thing with a detective at a crime scene. They don't entertain the idea that a crime just happened by itself. They look for a suspect. We all live our daily lives completely committed to the idea that reality can be interrogated and ultimately understood. But what happens if we actually deny this? What if we say, okay, sure, maybe just one tiny thing can exist as a pure brute fact with absolutely zero reason for being? Well, think about the comparison here. If you permit even one unexplained brute fact anywhere in reality, say way out at the edge of the cosmos, there is no principled logical rule stopping them from happening everywhere else. If the universe itself can exist for absolutely no reason, you have no non-arbitrary way to say a skyscraper couldn't just spontaneously pop into your courtyard tomorrow morning for no reason. Selective skepticism about this principle just doesn't hold water.
So that brings us to Section 1, Hume's famous attack. Can things actually exist without a cause?
Despite how completely essential this principle seems, it has faced massive resistance over the years, and the prime suspect in our dialectical thought experiment today is the 18th century philosopher David Hume. He came up with what is arguably the most influential attempt in history to completely dismantle this causal principle. He wanted to prove that things can, in fact, just begin to exist without a cause. So let's walk through Bruce Reichenbach's summary of Hume's logic step by step to see exactly why it convinced so many people. Basically, Hume says this: whatever is distinguishable can be conceived to be separate. Cause and effect are distinguishable, like you can easily think of one without the other. Therefore, they can be conceived as separate. And here's the real kicker. He says whatever is conceivable is possible in reality. So Hume concludes, a cause and its effect can be completely separate in reality, meaning an effect could just pop into existence with zero cause. I know, it sounds totally airtight, doesn't it? But we're about to put this logic on trial. Let's look at flaw number 1, imagination versus intellect. This brings us to our first major breakthrough in the investigation. Hume's argument actually contains a massive error because he completely conflates two distinct mental faculties. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark difference between what it means to imagine something and what it means to actually conceive of it. Hume says that if you can conceive of a rabbit just appearing without a parrot rabbit, then it's possible. But by conceive, Hume actually just means imagine, as in forming a mental picture in your head. But imagining is concrete, it's open to interpretation. Actually conceiving something, that is a strict intellectual activity. It means grasping the abstract universal essence of a thing to determine what is truly possible for it. To prove that your imagination and your intellect are not the same thing, let's look at a famous test from René Descartes. Think about these geometric figures. A circle? Super easy to picture in your mind's eye, and you have a totally clear concept of it. But what about a chiliagon? That's a shape with exactly 1,000 sides. Honestly, it's really hard to picture. And a myriagon? A shape with 10,000 sides? It is literally impossible to form a clear mental image of a 10,000-sided shape that looks any different from a regular circle. Your imagination just fails completely. And yet, your intellect can still clearly conceive of it. You can calculate its angles, you can understand its properties.
The point is, the limits of your imagination are absolutely not the limits of reality.
So let's see how this plays into Hume's next big error. Hume basically assumes that if you can think of two things distinctly, then they can exist separately in reality. But here's the thing. Distinct does not mean separable. For example, you can conceive of a triangle without specifically dwelling on the fact that it's trilateral, having three sides. But a triangle literally cannot exist in reality without being trilateral. Or you can conceive of a man without thinking about his exact height, but obviously no man can exist in the real world without actually having some specific height. So just because you can mentally separate a cause from an effect in your head doesn't mean they can actually be separated in the real world.
Moving right along to flaw number 2, the time trap.
Okay, so that takes down Hume's first premise. Now we're targeting his deeply held assumption that a cause must always happen temporally prior to its effect. The idea that event A happens, some time passes, and then event B happens. Think about a classic example here, a thrown brick shattering a window. A Humean would tell you the cause is the throwing of the brick and the effect is the shattering of the glass. Because the glass shatters a split second after the brick is thrown, they look like loose and separate events. You can easily imagine one without the other. But is that actually the real causal story?
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why Hume's view of time is so flawed. The true immediate cause isn't actually the throwing of the brick. The immediate cause is the bricks pushing through the window, and the immediate effect is the windows giving way to the brick. These two events are simultaneous. They happen at the exact same time. Actually, scratch that. They are really just the exact same event happening under different descriptions. The exercise of the brick's power and the manifestation of the window breaking, that's a reciprocal relationship. They are absolutely not loose and separate moments in time.
But hey, even in cases where a cause and effect really do happen at completely different times, they still aren't truly separable in the way Hume wants them to be. Consider a scar and a wound. Obviously, the wound happens first and the scar comes later. But you literally cannot describe what a scar is without referencing the wound that caused it. The descriptions are completely inherently interdependent. So Hume's attempt to slice reality up into disconnected, totally separate little frames, it just doesn't align with how the physical world actually operates.
Which brings us to flaw number 3, the teleporting bowling ball.
All right, so we've exposed the logical flaws in Hume's understanding of both the intellect and time. Now we finally arrive at his third and arguably fatal flaw. His scenarios are just severely underdescribed. Like Hume asks us to imagine a scenario where a bowling ball suddenly appears on a previously empty table. He says, look, I can imagine this happening without a cause, therefore it can't happen. But wait a minute, when you picture that happening in your mind, how do you actually know the ball came into being from absolutely nothing? Why couldn't it just be that it came into being with a cause you just can't see? Or, honestly, more fun to imagine, how do you know it wasn't just transported there from some cosmic bowling alley via a crazy sci-fi teleportation device? The brilliant philosopher Elizabeth Anscombe pointed out exactly why this severely underdescribed setup ruins Hume's entire argument. Think about normal life. How do we actually know if something was transported versus if it just magically came into existence? Well, we figure it out by identifying the cause. As she noted, we know an apple was transported to a desk because we find out someone, a cause, actually put it there. So the crucial point is this absolute paradox. For Hume to prove his bowling ball actually popped into existence from absolute nothingness, rather than just being teleported from across the room, he has to find a way to rule out teleportation. And the only way to distinguish coming into being from being transported is to explicitly invoke the concept of a generating cause versus a transporting cause. You see the problem? Hume literally has to use the very logic of causality to set up the example he wants to use to destroy causality. The moment you force his thought experiment to be precise, it completely defeats itself.
Well, we've reached the end of our investigation, and I think the evidence really speaks for itself here. Hume's famous attempt to break the rules of reality just falls apart. To actually deny the principle of sufficient reason, we have to pretend our mental pictures are the exact same thing as intellectual truth, we have to completely misunderstand how time and simultaneous causes work, and we have to rely on causal logic just to formulate the skeptical argument in the first place. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. If the universe without causes is truly this logically impossible to even define, is a universe without reasons actually conceivable at all? Thanks for exploring this explainer with me. Keep asking why, and I'll catch you in the next one.